All right, so here we are, 28 years later, a long awaited follow up to one of the greatest horror movies from the 2000s. And yeah, we had 28 weeks later, which, in my opinion, had one of the greatest, scariest openings of any horror movie. Don't fight me on that. But now we get a true sequel from director Danny Boyle and writer Alice Garland, who wrote the original 28 Days Later. And it's supposedly the start of a new trilogy. So was it worth the wait? Let's break it down. The rage virus is still a problem. While Europe has moved on, Great Britain remains under permanent quarantine. A community of survivors lives on a remote island called Lindisfarne, connected to the mainland by a guarded causeway. Jamie, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, is a scavenger. His wife, Isla, played by Jodie Comer, is dying from a mysterious illness. And their son, Spike, played by Alfie Williams, is about to undergo a kind of coming-of-age ritual. You know, nothing says manhood like dodging rage-infected gym bros in the British wasteland. Jamie takes Spike to the mainland, and things, of course, go downhill. They run into Alpha Infected, who are faster, smarter, stronger, and somehow angrier than before. They also encounter some sketchy survivors, mutated behavior, and a mysterious recluse named Dr. Ian Kelson, played by Ralph Fiennes, who lives in what can only be described as a haunted anthropology exhibit made of bones. So, how was it? Let me just start out by saying that I absolutely love 28 Days Later, and I really like 28 Weeks Later. And I've been highly anticipating a sequel to this series for a very long time. I've been waiting for 28 months later years, and now we're here at 28 years later. Obviously, when I heard that 28 years later was coming out and it was actually being made, I was pumped. And after that first trailer dropped, which let me just say that was probably one of the greatest trailers of all time, this is like one of my most anticipated films of the year. Seeing the original director and writer return for the sequel and making it into a trilogy, my bar is set pretty high. Let me just start out by saying this movie is visually stunning. It was shot on iPhone, and they even have a rig that's like a bunch of iPhones with certain action scenes. It's almost like a video game shot when an infected gets killed and it kind of shows them get headshot and it kind of turns into another angle. It does that several times in the movie. But comparing it to 28 Days Later, which was shot on mini DV, I just watched it recently. It is very ugly looking, but it's supposed to be. But there are some pretty great shots in that movie. But there are some very gorgeous scenes in this. Even some of the almost exaggerated shots of the sky are fantastic. And I will say this movie starts out pretty intense. I don't think the opening is as intense as the 28 Weeks Later opening, but the part of the story where father and son, Jamie and Spike, go out on the mainland for Spike's ritual of killing his first infected, it's very intense. Danny Boyle does not miss when he directs stuff like this. I believe he directed the first opening scene of 28 Weeks Later, but some of the stuff had my heart pounding. And I usually don't get worked up with movies, but man, it was intense. Aaron Taylor Johnson as Jamie was such a great performance. All these performances were fantastic, but with the writing, Jamie specifically, I think he's a very layered character. He's a great dad, a terrible husband, and maybe a worse man overall. He's not in the film a whole lot, but you can see how it's sort of raw and complicated by the time it gets to the end. And I would like to explore that a little bit more in the spoilers section, which will be later on. But I think the real MVP is Alfie Williams as Spike. He's a child actor, and he's basically carrying the film as the lead. This is basically a coming-of-age film dressed in a apocalyptic horror, and it totally works. He's believable, he's brave, he's vulnerable, and he brings a ton of heart to this story. I'm incredibly impressed by this kid. Jodie Comer doesn't get as much screen time, but she makes every second count. Her illness isn't a plot device, it's adding real stakes. And then later on, you got Ralph Fiennes, who's doing his weird, intense thing, giving monologues about life, death, and the infected while casually building a temple out of bones, like it's his hobby. I believe his character has a lot of layers to him too. So even though they're not featured a whole lot in this film, this being a planned trilogy, I look forward to them revisiting these characters and adding even more depth to them. Now, the infected. There's sort of like a evolutionary thing going on, and this isn't new to zombie movies. We've seen this probably starting from Day of the Dead. And I've always had a problem with the evolution of zombies because they are dead. How do you evolve dead flesh and dead organs in a dead brain? But I'm more forgiving with this one because these are actually living people who have this virus that they're just experiencing constant rage. And being that this is nearly 3 decades later, you would assume that there has to be some evolution, especially if you're making a third one of these, you're going to have to mix it up a little bit as well. But this time we have an evolved version called the Alpha Infected. These guys are like infected on steroids. They move like trained killers and seem more organized and have supernatural strength almost. And they're basically like the alpha of a wolf pack. So each alpha is going to have a bunch of infected around them. I like this edition. And yes, one of them looks like an MMA fighter with a bloodlust problem. And I think this film, it brings back some of the humor and humanity that I think was missing from 28 Weeks Later. It's not laugh out loud funny and doesn't undercut what's happening in the movie or in the story. It's little moments of levity, of humanity that lets the movie breathe and helps ground everything. But I'll just say the movie's not perfect. I believe much of the rest of the movie doesn't match the same intensity as the first third, but I don't see how you maintain that. And I think even though it's not as intense, I think still totally works. Another thing that I feel might hold people back from fully embracing this movie, it's not directed in the same way as 28 Days Later or even 28 Weeks Later. It's very much exaggerated. It's almost like we didn't get 28 Days Later Danny Boyle. We got Trainspotting Danny Boyle. That's with the soundtrack. And I mentioned this before with the iPhones, and the infected gets shot and it does this zoom thing around in a freeze frame. And they did this with, you've probably seen the iPhone rigs. There's 20 iPhones on it. And he's like including clips of medieval battles from an older film, which reminded me of Oliver Stone's constant switching to other shots from Natural Born Killers. That might not work for some people. I like the change. And a little annoying things to me personally was a lot of ex machina saves in the story, or they're saved by some outside person, and then it happens a few too many times for my liking. And woo, that cliffhanger ending. I think I'm still processing it. And I'm not going to go into it right now, but yeah, that was the one thing we talked about after leaving the theater for 15 minutes. We were all still processing what we thought of that. And the whole last act, it's not anything to do with violence or action or horror. It's very emotional, and I actually loved that. But with that said, this is a spoiler section. There's a ton of spoilers I want to talk about from the movie, especially that weird-ass ending that we got. And some of the stuff with the evolving infected, and maybe wondering where this series is going with this trilogy. So if you don't want to listen, just skip to the timestamp below and you'll get my overall rating and thoughts on the whole movie. All right, spoiler section time. Okay, the pregnant infected. That was not where I thought it was going to go. So there's an infected woman that she shows up earlier in the movie, and then they find her giving birth on a train, an abandoned train. And this is interesting because Jodie Comer's character goes over there, and the infected is giving birth in a lot of pain, and she puts her hands up like this, and the infected puts their hands with hers, showing that there's still a little bit of humanity left in this woman's vulnerable state, which I wasn't sure what to make of when I first saw it, but I find it interesting. I don't hate it. It's an interesting bit, and the baby survives at the end and is given to Jamie, who is Aaron Taylor Johnson's character. This movie really does set up a lot of stuff and a lot of little crumbs here and there for the next two movies, and the next movie has already been shot. They meet a Swedish NATO soldier and wanting to kill the baby. Of course, the alpha infected shows up, rips his fucking head off like Mortal Kombat, and they barely escape with the help of Dr. Kelson, who shoots the alpha with a morphine shot, the post-apocalyptic Pokemon move. This interesting speech that we get from Kelson about life and death, and he's got Bone Temple, where it's a lot of structures. In the middle is a pyramid you see on the movie poster with a bunch of skulls. And it's the skulls of people who are infected and non-infected, which he refuses to kill infected. It probably has to do with Hippocratic Oath. And it's an interesting character who has gone a little bit insane maybe, but his heart is in the right place. And the whole purpose is for Spike to take his mother, Isla, to see this doctor. Turns out that she has terminal cancer, and she asks Kelson to euthanize her. He does, and he presents her skull to Spike to put on top of Kelson's creepy Bone Temple Simba on Pride Rock. But it's sweet and it's beautiful. The way it's shot is very beautiful. Not a third act I was expecting for this movie, but it's very much welcomed. You think Kelson's gonna turn out evil, maybe like the soldiers in the first 28 Days Later. But he isn't. He isn't, and a lot of things in this movie, it make me want more, and I'm sure we're going to get more in the next movie, but I want to see Dr. Kelson again. So Spike leaves with the baby, going back to his village, except he leaves the baby at the village with a note to his dad, and he goes back to the mainland until he's ready to return. And I think Jamie's reaction is pretty interesting here. He throws a fit. He's about to go back after his son, except for there's a high tide, so he's stuck on the island. Now, this is a quick take on Jamie's perspective here. It's mentioned before that this rite of passage that his son is about to embark on is usually reserved for people who are 15 or 16. This kid's 12, and his wife is dying, basically, and he really isn't very concerned about it. So it makes me think he wants his wife to die and his son to basically make his own way so he can pretty much start over, because there's a plot element where he is having an affair with another woman. So that kind of makes this whole dynamic much more interesting for the second movie in this trilogy. But then it's 28 Days Later. This is where the weird ass cliffhanger ending happens. Spike is on the mainland being chased by infected and reaches a dead end. And out pops a group of survivors dressed in tracksuits with long blonde hair, doing some crazy ass ninja moves while a metal version of Teletubbies is playing. They're like Power Rangers fighting infected. Now, this is a far cry from the tone of the rest of this movie and the tone of the rest of this series. They're like knockoff Power Rangers from a Mad Max cosplay event. And you learn that the leader, Sir Jimmy, played by Jack O'Connell from Sinners, was the child from the opening, which I assumed was Aaron Taylor Johnson's character. Now, I don't know what to make of this. It took me out a little bit, I'm not gonna lie, but I feel like the second movie is gonna change in tone quite a bit. It might be more action-oriented. And it's not being directed by Danny Boyle. This next one is going to be directed by Nia DaCosta. But is this going to go the route of Mad Max Fury Road where it's sort of exaggerated? I don't know about that. But you know what? Fuck it. I'm on for this ride. They got a vision for this. Do it, man. Because it's been nearly 20 years since the last movie. How much zombie media has come out since then? We had The Walking Dead. We had The Last of Us. And countless movies. So I understand they just can't replicate what they did in 28 Days Later. But that was a wild swing there. I'm like, and I don't know what to make of it until I see the next movie, I think. But it did, I'm not gonna lie, it did take me out a little bit. My final score for 28 Years Later is a 4 out of 5. I was loving this movie. That cliffhanger ending, I was just confused at that. Who knows, when the next movie comes out or the whole trilogy comes out, I might change my rating for this. It might make sense by then. It was just a beautifully shot film. It doesn't feel like the 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks Later movies, and that's fine. I was incredibly invested in this. I like how they did the evolution of the infected. I can see audience backlash with this and just a knee-jerk reaction like, this isn't what I wanted, sucks. That's the beautiful thing about the marketing of this. It had this incredible trailer, not giving anything away. And that's part of the reason I think they spoil movies and trailers now, because they don't want to anger the viewers because it isn't exactly what they are expecting. If you don't like it, that's fine. I was expecting to like it more than I did, but I still really enjoyed this film, and I think it's a great sequel to 28 Days Later. It's interesting that I kept hearing that 28 Weeks Later was not canon in this, and they seem to reference it quite a bit, and even showing shots from the movie. Sure, it doesn't hit the same nerve as the original, but it's smart, ambitious, and emotionally resonant. It's a very human film, and for a film that's 20 years in the making, I think it sticks the landing, and more often than it stumbles.
There's no discharge in the war.
I'd be very interested to hear what you thought of that ending. Did it hit or miss for you? Drop a comment, rage responsibly, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to appease the algorithm gods. Check out the playlist below for more horror breakdowns, retrospectives, and chaotic rants. And see you next time, unless the rage virus gets us all first.